everybody, and welcome to the latest of our FrenchEntrée webinars. My name is Zoe Smith. I'm a digital editor of FrenchEntrée, and I'm going to be joined today by Eleanor, Head of French Immigration at Lexity, and Fabienne from FAB French Insurance. Today's webinar is going to be focusing on visas and residency in France. So if you are looking to make the move in 2024 or further in the future, and you want the latest information on how to do so, then this webinar is for you. For those of you that aren't familiar with FrenchEntrée, we are part of the France Media Group, and we've been a leading resource for French property buyers and expats for more than 20 years now. You can check out all of our free resources and sign up for our weekly newsletters over on FrenchEntrée.com. And if you're looking for extra help and guidance, you can also become a FrenchEntrée member and speak directly with our property and relocation advisors. Right, let's get started with today's Visas and Residency in France webinar. As I mentioned a moment ago, I'm joined today by Eleanor, Head of French Immigration at Lexidy, who are English-speaking French immigration lawyers. I'm also joined by Fabienne, who's a founder and managing director of FAB French Insurance, who are independent insurance brokers offering bilingual services, and most importantly, health insurance policies that meet the requirements for long-stay visas. Eleanor and Fabienne, if I could ask you both, please turn your cameras on now and come join me. There they are. Hi, Fabienne. Hi, Eleanor. A big thank you to both of you for giving up your time to be with us today. So we're aiming for a runtime of around 1 hour today, and I'm going to try and put as many of your questions as possible to Eleanor and Fabienne. If you have any questions as we go along, you can put them in the Q&A box on your screen at any time. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can also leave a comment and one of my colleagues will pick that up. Finally, if you don't get around to your question today, or if your question is too complicated to address in this webinar, we will be sending out a contact form to all of you after the webinar, so you can get in touch with them directly. One final thing before we get started today, a quick disclaimer. It is important to remember that all visa applications are considered on an individual basis by the French Immigration Department. The point of this webinar is to help you understand the rules so that you can maximize your chances of getting the French visa that you need. However, it's not a substitute for professional advice. So if you do need that kind of advice, then we highly recommend getting in touch with either Eleanor or Fab after the webinar. Okay, well, let's start things off today by meeting both of our experts. Let's go over to Eleanor first, if you'd just like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Lexity and the services that you provide.
Of course, thank you, Zoe, for having us here. So I'm Eleanor, I'm a French immigration lawyer, and I work at Lexidy Law Boutique. We are a law firm with offices in 5 different countries. We have 8 offices in 5 different European countries, and we focus mainly on immigration services, so visa applications, residency permit applications, citizenship or naturalization applications, but we also like to offer a 360-degree offer. So we also provide tax services, company formation, and everything you need for your move to France.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eleanor. And let's now go over to Fab and let us know a little bit about FAB French Insurance.
Well, thanks, Zoe. And well, thanks for having us as well. Hello, everyone, wherever you are on the planet. Hopefully, we'll see you soon in France. FAB French Insurance, I think the name speaks for itself. Like, we do the sexiest business in the world. We sell insurance policies. So from car insurance to property insurance, but most importantly, the holy grail to get a visa, medical policies, which often is the first step you'll need to consider when moving to France. We've also been working with Lexidy, but mostly Eleanor, almost since when they set shop in France. So it's been a real pleasure. We've been working together for years. And as you were saying, Zoe, in the introduction, we can tell, like, we're seeing people applying from themselves and with assistance of experts such as Eleanor, with Eleanor 100% acceptance rate. And sometimes we've seen rejections, unfortunately. So it is important to get your ducks aligned in a row in that industry. So hopefully we'll try to help you move across. And that's what we've been doing for 10 years and for years to come.
Brilliant. Right, well, let's get started with a general question. What would your advice be to someone looking to move to France in 2024? What do they need to know from a visa perspective?
Yeah. So for a visa perspective, first of all, I think that the most important questions to ask is how long you wish to stay in France and if you're going to be working in France or not, because we have different type of visa families, if I may say, and each of them has their well-designed purpose, and it's very important to know which one is the right for you in order to avoid some complications. For instance, we do see a lot of clients arriving and wanting to renew their visa and get a French residency permit, but depending on the very first step that they took, they can or cannot renew it in France. And this has a lot of implications on different aspects. And then in terms of the big visa families, it's very important to know if you are going to be working as an employee, as a freelancer in France, because this can determine a lot of different things. And following this, once you know which visa you need to apply for, having the right documents and paperwork ready, this can be very challenging. So it's important to know it well in advance. And among all these conditions, one of the most important points, and we see this very often, I'm sure that Fabien knows this better than me, but the insurance. It's very important to know which type of medical coverage you will have, which type of travel insurance you will have before making the move to France, because we see a lot of rejections based on this criteria.
Okay, well, maybe Fab could give us a little bit of an overview of what are the actual requirements of the health insurance contract that they need for a visa purpose.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, broadly speaking, this is one of the main differences that people often will experience when moving from a non-French country to France, is that France is known for being very administrative, but that's basically like many countries in the EU will follow the same thing. Like the EU is more administrative than the UK or the US, but also it's more like the kind of documentation that they expect. They're more picky. It's like, I don't know, if they expect to see something called birth certificate, whatever you present them with, if it's not labeled, if the title is not birth certificate, it's certain that they won't even read the document, even if you're making your point. So obviously, same rules apply for insurance. It very often boils down to the layout of the documentation, what's written on the document. So basically, you can have a compliant policy, but if it's labeled with wordings that they don't like, or if it's missing the words that could trigger them, then they may reject it or think it's not compliant, whereas it might be, and vice versa. So that's why it's difficult to say, oh, this is the list of requirements. If you just look at the requirements on paper, again, you can fail or actually go with a plan that's not compliant in theory and still would be accepted because of that framework that they expect to see. So, but the theoretical rules, actually, there are many rules. They expect to see in and outpatient benefits. They expect to see repatriation included on the policy. They expect to see, and this one is very weird, absolutely no excess or deductible or copay or whatever, like what they call in French, from the first euro. Okay, well, you probably afford a 50 euro excess, but they expect you to be covered. And unfortunately, that bit do inflates the premium quite a lot. They expect to see no medical exclusions. I think we'll deep dive on this one a bit. It's mostly because it's impossible if you've had a condition to not have exclusions, but they basically expect you to not have a medical exclusion labeled on your documentation. And they want to see at least 30,000 euros medical coverage per person and per year. However, sometimes, I don't know why, they apply 100,000 requirements. So, well, just to be on the safe side, we'd rather advise 100,000. It doesn't make much of a difference in terms of premium anyway. So probably in the safe side. But that's, yeah, it's quite a lot of requirements, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, French, as we all know, very much sticklers for administration and getting documents correct. On that note, Eleanor, what kind of documentation are people going to need for a visa application, and what does that application look like?
Yeah, it's a broad question. So what type of documents? Well, you have the common documents for all the visa families, and basically it will be like having a passport. This is absolutely mandatory. Having a medical coverage. So this is very important. Having a housing secured in France, it does not, then depending on the type of visa you're applying for, You do not need to buy a house or to rent a house or anything beforehand. And this is a question I have very, very often, almost every day. Should I rent something before arriving to France? And people are very anxious about this, but it's not necessary. You can perfectly have a hotel or Airbnb booking for the first month or week of your stay. This is accepted, but you need an address, and you need an address in France, and we need to know where we can reach you and where you're going. So this is these are the documents that are more or less common for all the family types, and then all the big visa family. But then, of course, depending on which application you're going to submit, you'll have extra documents. Some of them are a little bit more paperwork to prepare. For instance, if you're going to be a freelancer or invest in France, we will need some documents regarding your company, your business, your fundings. But if you just want to enjoy France for a year and apply for a very simple visitor visa, the documents to be gathered are a little bit less difficult to find. But, and I really want to stress this point, France is a very bureaucratic country. We like paper, we like forms, and you have the famous France visa application form, which is absolutely mandatory in all the consulates worldwide that you need to fill. And it's very important to know exactly what you're going to put and not do any mistake. Because if you make a mistake at this stage, it can have implications at a later stage when you want to renew your visa, and you can have a difficult time at the consulate or the visa center as well. Just a little tip for the people that are listening: you are able to save your form as a draft, and I really advise you to do so, because every time, even yesterday evening, I had a client who had just a little mistake in his form. And unfortunately, if the form was not saved as a draft but has been validated, we have no choice but to start all the process all over again and book another appointment, which involves more costs and time and stress. So yeah, my advice is to be accompanied and advised well in advance before making the move.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And in terms of timing, at what point does somebody apply for the long stay visa? How many months in advance? Because it's actually quite short, isn't it, from what I understand?
Well, once again, it depends, because the long stay visa is the big name for a lot of different options. So what I usually say is, for the visitor visa, we can have everything sorted out from the moment we start to the moment that the person gets their visa within 1 month, sometime a little bit more. Then it depends on everyone's reactivity, of course. But if you want to apply for a long stay visa, such as employee, entrepreneur, investor, talent passport, this can be much more time consuming, because we have to apply for some working authorizations or for some opinions from consulates, from French administrations, and it can take much more time. So it really depends.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good for people to know. Go on, Fab. I think you had something to add.
Just on the side note about that, because again, we have people that comes doing their visa themselves, that apply for insurance without an advisor. And we think, because we have 100% money back guarantee on our policies, so if the visa gets denied, even if that's not because of our policies, then we are aware that the visa got denied, because then we refund the policy. And definitely, I mean, the visas where we can see, I would say, a higher rejection rate or non-acceptance, because sometimes they've also changed their mind, but would be the business visas. Well, all the business types of visas, like entrepreneurs, profession libérale, whatever. The passport talent, massive rejections, because like the name suggests, well, in a way, you have to be a talent that France wants. And sometimes people just look, again, at the bare requirement, and they think they fit into the category. And then they apply for that type of visa, because it's also like a multi-use visa, so they like it. But they don't realize that they also are applying for a visa that is massively more subjective than, for example, the visitor visa that Eleonore mentioned, which basically is used for retirement or non-working in France. And that's something, same as Eleonore said, I cannot stress this enough. Like, well, I mean, you should seek professional advice, don't get me wrong, whatever the visa, but especially for me, for business visas, passport talents, these kind of visas, I mean, doing that on your own again, even with a bare business visa, well, you have to get a business plan as part of this. So there is no such thing as a standard business plan. So it's not like as if someone could say, oh, this is a business plan that they'd like to see. You're getting into subjective territory. So when it's going to be something subjective, and as the visa is also a political tool, you need to understand that, you need to have a feeling of what's going on. And working with someone that have seen this often, well, from my opinion, obviously I'm not the one buying, it should even be mandatory. Otherwise the chances of being rejected. From my clientele, I could tell it's probably one out of 3 applications for business visa that's rejected from what I've seen on my clientele. Yeah, so it's quite a lot. And for passport talent, it's more than 1.5.
Really?
Wow.
More than 50%. Yeah, again, people doing that themselves. When they're coming from you alone, obviously we've had 100% acceptance, right? Never had a problem. But yeah.
No, it's
blowing with you there. Well, Eleanor, maybe this is a good opportunity actually to just maybe talk people through a few of the options that are available for work visas in France, because I think firstly, perhaps some people aren't even aware that there is a very clear difference between coming on a visitor visa, which you can't work, and then various different types of work visa. Maybe if we could just give them an overview of the different options that are available.
Of course, I will simplify it a little bit for our audience. So I would put them in 3 different categories. So you have a category for employees, for freelancers, or people that want to work remotely for a foreign-based company. For employees, it's very important to have a working authorization, especially if you're going to be working with a French company or if you are going to be detached from a foreign company in France. So we need to apply for this working authorization beforehand. And this is also one common mistake that people make when they try to submit their application by themselves. They have all the documents, the working contract, etc., but they did not submit this working authorization. And again, it's quite administrative. There are a little bit of timings that need to be respected, documents, processes, some things that have to be done before other things. So it's important to be careful with this. But basically, this is the process for the employees. You need to have a sponsor, so an employer sponsoring you, apply for the working authorization, and that you get your visa. Now, for the freelancers, there are, again, different type of freelancers, but basically, you need to prepare a business plan. So explaining roughly what type of activity you're conducting, what type of clients you will have in France, how much you think you will invoice in France. It does not need to be accurate. It's just a project, and you don't even have to have any experience or have an existing business before making the application. So it's not that challenging, and it's a very good option for people that want to do teaching, photography, or any type of freelancer activity that you can think of. So again, in this case, we need to apply for a working authorization, but it's a different process, of course. It's not really an authorization. It's just an opinion on your project, on your business plan that we're going to ask to the French administration. And once we have it, then we go to the consulates. I really insist that no business needs to be existing before the application. It's just a project. So I like to keep things simple. And last but not least, the famous visitor visa that everyone is talking about and everyone wants. Actually, my colleagues from our offices in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece, even, they are quite jealous because they do have the digital nomad visa. In France, we do not have this, but we have other ways to work remotely. And with this visitor visa, we do attract a lot of digital nomads. Why? Because you cannot work in France, meaning you cannot have a French working contract. You cannot have French clients. You cannot have links with the French labor law market. But as long as you work remotely for a foreign-based company with no links with France, you may apply for the visitor visa, and it's not a problem. We submit sometimes working contract payslips to the consulate, and they still accept and deliver visitor visa. I understand that the conditions, when we tell them, they seem a little bit complicated to understand, because you have to sign a paper saying that you are not going to be working in France. But we have to think at the time when this law was created, when this visa was created, there was not really teleworking. And so this has not really been regulated at the moment, but in any case, it's accepted and it's not a difficulty. Just one little thing before switching to another question. Even if you're in France with a long stay visitor visa, you need to declare your taxes in France, even if you're not working for a French employer. And I really insist on that because you can have very bad surprises, and feel free to reach out to us because we do have a French tax department that is very busy with the visitor visas applicants.
Okay, yeah, and that is a really important thing to add. And whilst we're on the subject of working visas, Fab, are there any changes with regards to the health insurance policy? If somebody's coming on a visitor visa versus on a business visa or work visa, is it the same or?
Well, there is one small implication because as Eleonora was saying earlier in the conversation, it's very important to not have applied for the wrong type of visa or check the wrong boxes in a way. Because, for example, the visitor visa, the long stay visa, there is like a 6 to 12 month and a 12+ month option. And so if you check the wrong box, you may struggle to actually apply for French Social Security, which is supposed to be eligible for. But basically, if you've not applied for a renewable type of visa, that may deny you entry into the French Social Security system, which might be a big problem. And as Elena was saying as well, all of that is kind of intertwined. You know, they grant you access to the French Social Security kind of in advance because, by the way, after 90 days once you've been in France, you can apply for French Social Security. We call that CPAM. It's the equivalent of the NHS, for example, in the UK. So you can apply for that after 90 days. But depending on the type of visa you've applied for, so you might have a problem. And they also expect you to be filing taxes. That's why they accept you in the first place. But obviously, usually after 90 days, you would not have filed your taxes yet. So all of that becomes intertwined. But when comes the time for residency application, for example, if you didn't file the taxes or if you've applied for the wrong type of visa, which was not a renewable one, all of that could fall apart. So it's not directly in relation because it's not basically due to new regulations, but due to the fact that you've done everything right or not, then you may end up struggling to enter the French Social Security system. And also in regard to taxes, for this one, Brexit actually wasn't that bad in that regard because some of the post-Brexit agreements do allow, I would say, the Brits in general to enter the French Social Security scheme potentially for free through the S1 program, for example. Maybe we'll mention this later. But for example, for Americans, this is a completely different story. And Americans pensioner most of the time, I don't know much about these taxes, but so US pensions often untaxable in France. And people think, okay, it's not taxable, so I don't need to file the taxes in France. Yes, you do. You do need to declare household income because there is something called the CSM tax. Basically, the Americans, they've never paid for French Social Security, and they may have to pay a tax to get into French Social Security. And by the way, this is also mandatory. I've seen many Americans expats asking us, well, I'll just get private medical insurance and we'll just renew it. I don't want to enter the French system. It is mandatory to be, if you are a French permanent resident, you also need to apply for French Social Security. It is mandatory. And that may come with a tax. And sometimes some people find out, 1 year, 2 years later, like they receive an 8,000 euros bill because they forgot to declare some things or whatever, or they didn't anticipate it on something. So again, I'm not playing the fear-mongering card because most of the time, if you've anticipated on this, and that's why I basically all day long, I'm like, speak with Eleonor's lawyers, actually tax advisors, because if you plan ahead, most of the time, this is actually great. France is not that expensive tax-wise. For Americans or UK clients, you usually end up paying less or kind of the same thing. So it's not bad. And it's a joke I like to make. The wealthiest guy in the world lives in Paris. So it has to be good in a way. So, but it also is important to plan ahead. If you don't, you may be up to some nasty surprises, like Eleanor pointed out. So so these are the implications that we kind of see on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this is really important to point out because although obviously we're not going into tax as such on this webinar today, as you said, it is all connected because as we'll get to in a minute, applying for that residency card, if you don't have all the paperwork, which obviously includes having filed your tax return and being in the social security system and all of that.
And if I might, a small side note, because I think this one is very important for most of the audience. I'm sure most of you guys watching this are considering moving to France and having some sort of a small activity like, Airbnb's, gîte business. And in that regard, this is typically French because we mentioned work. And that's also why you need to speak with advisors that know that you may think it's work, but as far as France is concerned, and I think, Eleanor, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think up until 23,000 euros, France basically may consider this as a non-professional activity, and therefore you still visitor visa compatible. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are different thresholds, but either you have your visitor visa, but you need to be very careful and maybe having some advice beforehand. Either a lot of our clients apply for the entrepreneur visa and they open Airbnb or gîte. Very often they are couples and one of them apply for the visitor, the other the entrepreneur, just the time to see how it goes. And but there are many different solutions, of course.
Basically, don't consider, the bottom line was sometimes you think it's work, it might be qualified. As Elena was saying, you could apply for a non-working visa being a remote worker. This is a bit counterintuitive. Or operating a small gîte activity, like if we're talking, some people will be making, I don't know, a couple thousand a year. So France will be happily seeing this as a hobby in a way, like it's not a hobby, but you'll be basically filing that on your tax returns and that's it. They will not, that would still be visitor visa compatible. That's why I'm implying. So again, all the more reason to at least be seeking advice because sometimes, some people are heading towards a direction which they think is the right one and actually it may end up doing some things wrong, with good intentions,
Yeah, and something I say a lot is that declaring your taxes does not necessarily mean that you're going to pay anything. You just have to declare it. And it's important if you plan to stay in France for a few years, because as you might know, after 5 years of continuous residency in France, you can apply for a 10-year residency card. Just a reminder, in France, we do not have a permanent residency permit. This does not exist. The maximum you can get is 10-year, which is renewable on a 10-year basis, which is perfectly fine. It's important to show that you have been declaring your taxes, that you have complied with the rules in France, that you have been there for a certain period of time. As well, after 5 years of residency in France, you can also consider applying for French citizenship by residency. And in this case, it's really, really important to show that you have been complying with everything.
But the good news is they no longer test for your wine intake, guys. So the ones of you who aren't drinking anymore, you're fine.
That is a joke, just making that clear. But the tax return one was true. While on the subject, let's talk a little bit about the process of moving into residency. So most people are going to come on that initial 12-month long stay visa. What happens next? What's the process to getting that Carte de Séjour, that residency card, and moving on?
Mm-hmm. Okay, just a clarification. The 12-month visa, is equivalent to a residency permit, which means that it has the same legal validity, although it does not look the same. It's a stamp on your passport. It gives you more or less the same rights as a physical residency card. So what you need to know if you want to renew your long stay visa, well, first of all, I cannot repeat it enough. Be very careful with the form that you fill, because there is one little box that will make all the difference. And I saw many mistakes made here. So assuming that you made your form correctly and you have a renewable long stay visa, it's important to start the renewal process 4 months before the expiration of the visa. In theory, if you do it 2 months before, it's fine, but sometimes the prefecture, which is the administration, immigration in France, is not so responsive. So I advise, in order not to be stressed by the timing, to start it well in advance. And depending on the place where you live, you will have one prefecture that will take care of your application, and they all have their own little way of doing things. So either it will be online, either you will need to go on at the administration and submit your paperwork the old way physically.
Okay. Right, I have quite a few questions that I want to get to, but before we move on to them, I just want to quickly circle back. So I've actually had quite a few people write in with questions, and there were quite a few people that have made the mistake, exactly what you both already said, of applying for this 6 month. So it's like a temporary long stay visa and not the 12-month one. Now, firstly, how do people make sure that they avoid doing that if that's not what they want? And secondly, if they have made that mistake, is there any way out of it? Is there any way to change it? Or at what stage, should I say, could you cancel the application, for example, if you realized, or do you have to go through with it and start again at another point?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first answer, what to be careful with, is making sure that you choose the box for saying that you're going to stay in France for more than 1 year, even though it's not the case. Because very often I have people saying, "Oh, I want to move to France for 6 to 8 months," but even though they say this, I will choose the more than 1 year option because I want to give them the flexibility to change their mind, and we never know what life can bring. So it's always good to keep all the doors open. So this is the first point. Secondly, if you have a 6 month visa and you were wishing to have a 1 year renewable one, there are different possibilities. Well, the more pragmatic and boring, I would say, would be to apply again at the consulate, make sure that you don't do the same mistakes all over again. But there is another way, which would be contacting the prefecture and asking if exceptionally they can renew your visa. This we do it as lawyers a lot, as you can imagine, because we deal with atypical situations. So it's not a straightforward process. But in France, let's say that we have a principle in law that is the discretionary side of the administration, and you can always try to, if I may say, negotiate a little bit with them. It's a way of, you need to be careful on how you present things, have valid reasons. For instance, if I have someone from Australia, it's not the same thing as a British citizen that just needs to take a train to go back home, even though I know that it's already something. But of course, it's not exactly the same problems that they face, or people that need to be with a relative that they take care of or that are working in France. We can try to justify a little bit this type of request. So the door is not closed, but it won't be easy. And it's up to the final decision of the prefecture.
Okay, that's really good and very reassuring, I think, for people to know at least there is an option. And I guess that's one they should definitely get in touch with somebody like you about.
And actually, a question I'm being asked often, because sometimes people, they're like, I'll be working with an immigration expert. And when I refer them, for example, to Eleanor and his team and her team, and they're like, what's the difference with the lawyer? And I'm like, well, a lawyer, only lawyers, if there is anything wrong in the process, only a lawyer can legally challenge, the decision or go to court. Obviously, an expert cannot represent you to court. You have to be a lawyer. So, well, obviously you don't anticipate for things to go wrong, but if they do, only a lawyer can then back up your file or go to court or, again, contest the decision. So it makes quite a lot of difference, because as they also can be held responsible, lawyers have a kind of a bigger commitment towards the visa being a success. Again, we cannot know in advance, but for me, this is a higher level of implication that you have with the lawyer, because they can go one step further and also have, in a way, more responsibility, more skin in the game, we could say, and therefore, it kind of justify very often the difference, because, lawyers, they have access to things that experts can't really do. Experts are just advisors at the end of the day.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
that's
some time to go and challenge the decisions, especially for people that are like a spouse of French or spouse of EU national. The process can be very time consuming, and before the people actually get a residency permit, it can take months. And in order to have at least a provisory document, sometimes we have no choice but to do a small court process to get these papers, and it works. So.
okay, brilliant. Well, we're going to come back to that question about EU spouses and French spouses as well. Let's just quickly go through a few questions. I've got quite a few people have sent them in already. Right, I've had quite a few questions about the new French immigration law. There was a lot of talk about this, particularly in Britain. People want to know what this is actually going to change for them, and also questions about language test requirements. How has this changed?
Yeah. So for our customers, the new law that's entered into force this year did not change much because it did not have a lot. It does not has a lot of implications on the visa application. At a certain point, there was a proposal for British citizens who were owning a house in France to have a sort of visa facilitator, but unfortunately, it did not. It was not accepted at the end. So there is no real difference for our customers, and I always repeat not to worry too much about this. And
in regard to the language test, that I've seen, obviously, I've read so many articles online. Most of the times inaccurate, I would say, because actually the only three. And so, as Eleanor was saying, first, and that's the most important thing, visas are not impacted. There is no such thing as a language test, at least for now. Also, bear in mind, it's a political tool. If they want to want something else tomorrow, well, this is an ever-evolving industry. But for now, there's no such thing as a language test. No. It's only for residency permits, and it's only for multi-years residency permits. And by the way, they've changed the name just because it wasn't enough. So like a Carte de Séjour, but anyway. And it's only for 3 different types of permits: spouse of a French citizen, family reunion, and the third one is partner of our carte de résident, or they call it, so partner of the carte de résident. And basically for our clientele, I think it's sometimes if you have a French spouse, yes, you might be impacted, but that requirement was already there, actually. You already have to have the French test if you were the spouse of a French citizen. So there's pretty much no difference for us.
There is
and I think that is point out that that's not your first year in France or your second year in France. It's probably, correct me if I'm wrong, more like 3 to 5 years down the line. Oh, yeah. So if you're planning to, start speaking, learning French, and
probably don't impact our audience at all. Don't impact our audience at all.
Yeah, and the worst that can happen is that you renew a 1-year residency permit, which is fine as well, as long as you do have a document that shows that you are legally residing in the country. There is no problem. So no, there are no such things as language tests for visa applications.
Okay. Well, hopefully that's reassured people not to worry too much about that. Okay, we've already touched on it a little bit, but we get many questions all the time, and I can already see lots of them going into the Q&A box now about moving to France with a spouse who is either an EU citizen or a French citizen. I know the process is slightly different for both of them. So what do people need to know about that?
Yes, well, let's start with the French one. Very, very, very important. If you did not get married in France, make sure that you register your marriage at the consulate of the place of the wedding. It's very important to to do it in advance before the marriage, because it happens very, very often that people get married and then they come to me, oh, I want to go to France. And I ask them, have you been to the consulate and did you register your marriage in France? And they say no. And then things are a little bit more time consuming because we have to do everything afterwards. The process is quite simple if you do it on time and not 1 month before the wedding, but well on time. If not, it's not a catastrophe. We can perfectly register your marriage in the French civil registers, but it takes a little bit more time, and it's still it's a process that will be done abroad in the consulates of the country where you got married. So this is the very first thing. Provided that you have your marriage registered and everything is on track, you have two different possibilities. Either you apply for a long stay visa as the spouse of a French citizen, either you enter the country and within the first 3 months of your arrival, you go to your local prefecture and you apply for this residency permit. What they will ask for sure is that you need to show that your marriage was or celebrated in France or registered in France. I insist. And secondly, it's the community of life. So you have to show that you are living under the same roof as your husband or wife. So basically, these are the main conditions. Regarding the EU citizens, indeed, it's a different process. So, as you may know, the European Union protects the family life of its citizen, even though you're not in the country of your spouse, and you can travel within the EU. As another European citizen. So what you need to do is enter France as a tourist. So you're not going to apply at the consulate. It's a bit different, but you enter France and within the first 3 months, same things, you apply. Now it's a process that has been unified across France. So it's always online through a website that is called ANEF, Administration Nationale des Étrangers en France. Well, it's a bit complicated. We like acronyms and complicated words. You do this, well, it's an online process. So you need to fill in fill your documents, etc. It's a bit challenging because they will keep asking for more and more information and more documents. So what we usually do is that we provide a lawyer's cover letter with all the legal backgrounds, because sometimes the prefecture are not very well aware of the details of these types of residency permits. Yeah, that's it.
And
Brilliant.
a quick note on medical care, because it's a joke I like to make. Since Brexit, I think the population of Ireland probably doubled. So the thing is that it's not that there are different types of EU nationals, but sometimes you could be Irish, like you've lived in Ireland, you've paid social taxes in Ireland, social charges, and therefore you're eligible for Irish social security, which means you can apply for something that, for example, you used to have in the UK, which is the EIC, European Health Insurance Card. But when moving to France, it's pretty much, even if you're an EU citizen, you pretty much have the same requirements as a visa, although they're much lighter. Like you still need to have an address, you still need to have a sustainable way of living, and you still need to have medical coverage. Usually, as an EU citizen, you are applying towards a national EU social security scheme, for example, Ireland. But if you just have a passport and no coverage actually in Ireland or in another EU country, but I'm taking Ireland because it's often relevant, then actually you're not covered if you move to France. And you still need to have medical coverage, because having medical coverage in theory is also something that's required to support the residency application. Again, the difference is, being Europeans, they have a very soft stance on this. But again, these are still requirements. So medical coverage or private medical coverage often is required unless you can get the EIC or you have European Social Security one way or another. So this is important because many European citizens only have a passport and not a coverage in Europe.
Yeah, and this is actually something, I wonder if this makes a difference with regards to moving with an EU spouse. If you're moving with an EU spouse who's not actually currently resident in the EU and just has a passport, is that a different process? Do they need to establish residency in France before they can bring their partner with them? Is that a problem, or can they just move together?
They can move together. It's important to show that they will have the same address in France. And usually what I do in order to avoid any type of difficulties is that we go to the town hall and we register the EU spouse in the local town hall. So then we can go to the prefecture with all the documents showing that they are indeed living together in this place.
Okay, great. a couple of questions that people have put in the Q&A box. Does a PAX or a civil partnership count the same as a marriage for the purpose of a visa?
This is a tricky question. For the visa, I would not recommend to apply with just a PAX, but what you can do is apply, for instance, for a visitor visa or another type of visa. And after your arrival in France, we switch it. And this is also an important thing that I would like to remember to say here, is that you are not stuck with one visa or another. We can always change as long as you meet the requirements of the new residency permit that you're going to apply to. In terms of PAX, I do it very often that I switch from one residency type to a partner of a French or of an EU citizen. And this is done easily in France.
Okay, that's really good to know. And another one that people keep asking, this is more on the travel side, actually. So there's a bit of confusion over if you are the spouse of an EU citizen, are you allowed to travel freely within France and the EU, or does the 90 out of 180-day rule still apply to you?
Well, this is the same rule for all residency permits, no matter if you are a spouse of EU citizen or not, but you need to stay in France at least for 6 months out in a year in order to be able to renew it. This is the theory.
Okay.
But the 90 days rule, I mean, even if they're the spouse of an EU citizen, they remain non-European. So that 90 days allowance still apply, that they cannot exceed it unless, as Elena was saying, they seek residency in a particular country. Because, and I don't know if you've said it, but the spouse of an EU citizen, they have 90 days. If they enter France, for example, with the spouse, the partner, they have 90 days to secure that spouse of an EU citizen residency permit. So it's actually because of that, because there is still the 90 days allowance that they should not have exceeded, although there is a bit of a tolerance.
Yeah,
probably.
so to clarify that doesn't, you don't get a sort of free pass on the 90 out of 180 day rule just because you're, okay. And
to be fair, even I'm French. If I were to be living, to go, I mean, I'm living like half an hour from the Spanish border. And if I want to go live there, I will need to apply for a residency permit in Spain. I kind of need to declare myself as being a Spanish resident now, and I'm a European citizen. So, it's just that I have a bit more of a tolerance out of like 6 months, but nevertheless, you're supposed to declare that you are switching countries. And, it's not like you're just traveling around. Again, no one will come checking or knocking at the door and say, well, get out. But you're supposed to say what you're doing.
Yeah, for EU nationals, there is more tolerance. You do not need to apply for a residency permit if you have a European nationality, but you need to be economically self-sufficient and not be depending on the social security. So basically, you need to have a coverage. These are the rules. But if you follow them, you do not even need to apply for anything as a EU citizen.
Okay, great. Right. I'm going to try and race through some of these questions. We've got 10 minutes left. Let's have a look. Quite a lot of questions about costs. And I know that this will obviously vary for different people, but what are the sort of average costs that people are looking at just to get that initial visa and perhaps for that initial Carte de Séjour, that first year residence permit?
There are the visa booking, the appointment fees that are ranged between 20 euros to maybe 80 more or less. And once you arrive in France, you have to pay a tax, which is around 225 euros per person. And basically that's it. Then you have maybe the cost of gathering the documents that you need. For instance, if you're in France, and you want to renew your visa, it's mandatory to have a birth certificate that needs to be translated, not by any translator, but by a translator that is registered in a French Court of Appeal. And this is a mistake also that we see a lot. These are little costs, but that you need to take into account before making the request.
So in regard to costs, there is... So unfortunately, the biggest expense very often, depends on the age band, but it will be private medical insurance. So it depends, but let's say someone in his early 60s, probably would be something like 2,000 per person for a whole year. But so that's quite an expense. And again, it's a mandatory requirement. also something, because I've read quite a few comments about this. People hear about that medical exam that they'll need to go once you move to France. Within the first 90 days, you activate your visa, and then you're provided with an appointment for medical checkups, like you'll get through a scan and stuff like that. Don't worry about this. Basically, no one will say, well, go back home or something. It's mostly to check actually for contagious disease. Like they literally check for I forgot the name of the disease, but like things like rabies and stuff like that. I forgot about, but that's literally what they check for, and also for statistics about how healthy or the peoples are. And that's it. Again, they used to be testing out. I'd like that the tasting wine intake, but they don't do it, so they didn't get my proposal when It's a joke. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's reassuring for people, though, I think, because I think that can be quite scary when people get the sort of medical check through. For some people, they're not quite sure what that's going to entail.
Even if you have conditions, that's not a problem. Again, they just want to make sure you don't have contagious disease. And, well, it could be political. Like during COVID, they were checking for this. Are you up to date with your vaccines and stuff like that? But nowadays, it's kind of business as usual. But that's what they're looking for. That's it. So unless there is a problem,
Right. Okay, right. Vanessa says, I'm looking to make the move this year. I'm putting my house up for sale shortly. How long before I move should I start the application for the visa and take out my insurance?
Well, if she knows that she's going to move, I would say as soon as possible, because at least you're not stressed with last-minute documents, last-minute requests. You know where you're going. It's always better to start in advance. Also, keeping in mind that this summer we will have the Olympics here in Paris, and we expect that the consulates will be under a lot of demand, and it will be harder than usual to get appointments. So the sooner the better.
And is there a minimum amount of time? Sorry, Fab. Is there a minimum time before a minimum amount of months before the date that they're going to arrive in France that they have to apply?
There is no minimum that is set, but I strongly recommend, if it's only for a simple type of visa, at least 1 month. If it's a more complex one, even more.
Okay.
And in regard to insurance, that there is many companies out there won't release the full documentation unless you've paid for the policy and got the policy started, actually. So many policy kind of force you to get the policy started 1, 2, 3 months ahead of the actual intended arrival date. Again, also another reason to be working with people that are kind of used to be working with visa applications. Well, obviously like we are, but even if you're not working with us, I'd be sad, but still make sure you work with people that do know about French visa processes, because it's kind of a shame. Some companies do exist where you can have a start date that's actually matching your intended visa arrival date, which also increases the odds of the visa to be accepted from straight ahead, because sometimes they may not like it if the dates aren't aligned. So again, all of the more reasons, these are kind of undisclosed rules, but still will help or actually diminish the value of your fine.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Right, a few people have asked about, could you talk a little bit about the process of getting French nationality? At what point is this available to people, and what does that process look like? Is that something that's an easy option for people or not at all?
I see. It's a very broad subject, but to simplify it, we have like 3 main categories of applying for French citizenship. You have through descent. If you have a French parent, ascendant, it can even be grandparents, and you can have a lot of surprises with this. Citizenship by marriage. So if you are married with a French person for at least 4 years and living together, if your marriage has been registered and transcribed, as I mentioned before, you can apply for citizenship through marriage. And you have citizenship through residency, which we call naturalisation. After 5 years of living in France with a valid residency permit, hopefully declaring your taxes in France, having no problems with the police or anything, you may apply for this citizenship through residency. It's important to keep in mind that you need at least 5 years of residency in France. It could be 2 years if you have been a student in France previously, but this is another story. And you need to show that you're economically self-sufficient, that you're not a burden for the social security, etc., etc. Important to register yourself in the French social security, as Fabien mentioned previously, and also speak French and know French culture, which is important.
Yeah, and so at that point, you definitely will need to pass a French exam.
For citizenship, because again, otherwise for residency permits, the French test most of the time is not required.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important to
okay.
that.
Quite a few people also asking about what kind of visa do they need to retire to France, and specifically, what are the requirements for that visa?
Yeah, for retirees, the best one would be the visitor visa. It's a 1-year long stay visa. You can renew it on a yearly basis, provided you made your application correctly. And you have basically 3 main conditions. You need to have enough savings to support yourself in France, medical coverage for France, and promise that you're not going to be working in France, meaning, as I mentioned before, no links with the French labor law market.
Okay, and what is do we have a sort of ballpark figure for what the sufficient funds are? And also, where can those sufficient funds come from? Does that have to be pension income, or can it be other sources?
Yeah, so the sufficient funds, we always use the French minimum wage in order to determine what is the sufficient or not. So as per today, it changes every year, but we are around 18,000 euros per year. So it's around 1,300 per month, more or less. And how you present it? Well, any type of proof is accepted. The easiest way would be to show a savings account or a bank account, but of course, any type of asset, any type of proof you may have is acceptable, but be careful on how you present it. Again, because we've seen many rejections with people that have the funds, but did not provide the right documents.
It's a very good example. I mean, a couple of days ago, I've had a visa being rejected from one of our clients because they've used a premium bound, and apparently the guys processed the file at the consulate in the UK were not aware of what that was, because this is British specific. We don't have that in France, and they did not recognize this, or maybe were not happy to accept this, and they rejected it. So it might have been accepted if presented differently. I'm not saying, as Eleanor was saying, there is kind of a discretionary aspect to all of this. And again, yet one more reason to make sure you're presenting a file that looks the way they want to see it, in a way. That's what it boils down to. Like when you provide a bank statement, if you just highlight the bottom line at something, sometimes it's as simple as that or as complex as that. It depends on the angle.
A really good point. Okay, one final question. Is there an age limit for applying for a visa in France? And this is also a good question for Fab, because is there an age limit for health insurance? We'll go with Eleanor first.
No.
That's straightforward.
That was a good one. Fab, I feel like you might
just answer ever.
For health insurance.
Well, unfortunately, I do have one, but it's 99 years old, so safe to say that there is no limit. We did have a client move to France at 96, so close to it's a very brave guy. But yeah, no, well, the only limit would be like how much you can pay, you can afford paying, because obviously the older you get, and especially past 80s, the older, the higher the premium. But apart from this, well, for me, it's not a straight yes. The limit is 99 years old. Yeah. So Centurions, okay. Unfortunately, if you're listening, sorry.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be one. Okay, great. Well, we're going to wrap things up there now because we are completely out of time. Thank you so much to those of you who attended, and a big thank you to Eleanor and Fab for giving up their time today and answering all your questions. Remember, if you do have any additional questions or you want to get in touch with either Lexidy or FAB French Insurance, look out for that follow-up email, which will have all the details of how you can do that. If you enjoyed today's webinar, keep an eye out for more FrenchEntrée webinars over the coming months, and make sure to check out all of our resources over on FrenchEntrée.com. And if you do want to discuss your situation with one of our FrenchEntrée property and relocation advisors, you can also become a FrenchEntrée member. Finally, do let us know what you thought of today's webinar. Did you enjoy it? What topics would you like to see us to cover in upcoming webinars? You can drop us an email at webinar@FrenchEntrée.com. Thank you one more time to everyone for attending, and one more time to Eleanor and Fabienne, and I'll hopefully see you all on the next one.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.